What did Andrea Stella really see in the data that set off all the alarms at McLaren? And how did that invisible detail end up completely destroying Oscar Piastri's lap when he was on pole pace in Miami 2026? Because we are not talking about a simple error or traffic or poor execution. We are talking about something much deeper, something that the team itself did not know how to detect in time, and that turned a winning classification into one of the biggest collapses of the year. This is where the illusion begins to build, and also the fall. McLaren had made an extremely aggressive decision before arriving in Miami, not to introduce gradual improvements, but to go for a profound transformation of the car. It was not a simple evolution, it was practically a new aerodynamic concept taken to the track, a risky move designed to change the team's competitive course. This philosophy has already borne fruit in the past, as occurred after the team's turning point in recent seasons, where a major update completely changed its position on the grid. The problem is that these types of decisions have a double side. On the one hand, they raise the performance ceiling. On the other hand, they drastically reduce the car's understanding in extreme conditions. And the classification is precisely that, the absolute limit. Every corner, every acceleration, every micro-adjustment counts. What can go unnoticed in long runs or even in a sprint becomes a critical weakness in a fast lap. McLaren arrived with speed, yes, but not with certainties. During the first sessions of the weekend, this lack of understanding was not evident. The car responded, the times were right, and Piastri was able to execute without major problems. This is key because it creates a false sense of control within the team. When a new package works well enough, it's easy to assume it's under control, but in reality, it's often just hiding problems that haven't been exposed yet. And Miami, with its unique characteristics, ended up being the perfect setting for all of this to come to light. The breaking point begins to brew just before the main classification. Conditions change, demands increase, and the margin of error disappears. This is where variables that had not been fully tested come into play. Energy management, the interaction of the new aerodynamic package with the hybrid system, and above all, the way in which the car delivered power at critical moments of the lap. What seemed like a minor detail was actually about to become the determining factor in the disaster. Piastri enters the classification with confidence, with pace, with the logical expectation of fighting at the top. But what happens on the track doesn't match what the team expected to see in the data. The turn does not flow, the power delivery is not consistent, and the most worrying thing, there is no immediate explanation. This is what completely upsets McLaren because when a driver loses performance without a clear cause, the problem is no longer one of execution. It is structural. And this is where the seeds of scandal are sown. Because while from the outside it seems simply a bad classification, internally a much more uncomfortable reality was beginning to emerge. The car had a behavior that they did not fully understand, and that behavior was directly affecting performance at the most important moment of the weekend. This first act is not about a mistake, it is about an illusion. The illusion of control, the illusion of progress, the illusion that everything was ready to take the next step. But in Formula One, when you don't understand your car 100%, that step forward can turn into a brutal fall in a matter of minutes. And that's exactly what happened to McLaren, without realizing it until it was too late. The moment when everything changes within McLaren does not happen on the track, it happens later. Because while from the outside the narrative was simply a bad classification by Oscar Piastri, within the team data began to appear that did not fit with absolutely anything they expected to see. And that is where Andrea Stella begins to connect the dots and discovers something that completely transforms the reading of what happened. Initial analysis reveals a critical anomaly. Piastri's performance loss was not constant, it was intermittent. This is key because it immediately rules out a typical setup or pilot execution problem. It wasn't that the car was slow, it was that at certain specific points of the lap it simply stopped delivering what it should. And when you start mapping those points, the real culprit appears, the power system. Here the phenomenon that completely changed the classification in Miami comes into play, super clipping. A behavior derived from the 2026 regulation that caused power cuts in the middle of the fastest lap, just at the moments where the driver needs maximum acceleration. But the most dangerous thing was not its existence, but its unpredictability. It didn't follow a set pattern, it wasn't consistent from lap to lap, and most critically, it wasn't completely modeled by the team. When Stella reviews the data in depth, she finds the hidden pattern. Every time Piastri entered key acceleration zones, the car was entering an early energy trimming phase. That is, the system was protecting the battery ahead of time, sacrificing power in the most sensitive points of the circuit. This, combined with the new aerodynamic package, generated a devastating effect. The car had load, it had stability, but it had no thrust when it was needed most. And this is where the scandal takes real shape, because this problem didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the direct result of the interaction between two decisions: a completely redesigned car and an energy system that had not been correctly adjusted for that new aerodynamic behavior. In other words, McLaren created a more energy-demanding car, without completely adapting the way it managed that energy. The hardest thing of all is that this failure was not visible to the naked eye. This was not an obvious mistake, nor a broken part, nor a bad strategy. It was an invisible problem, buried in the logic of the hybrid system, which only manifested itself at the most critical moment, the qualifying lap. And that's why no one detected it before. While other drivers were able to complete their laps with relatively consistent power delivery, Piastri was fighting a car that, without warning, was taking away performance in key sectors. This explains why the lap never finished closing, why the times did not work out even though the pace was there, and why the final difference was so brutal compared to what was expected. When Stella connects all these pieces, the conclusion is as clear as it is worrying. They didn't lose qualifying because of a lack of speed, they lost it because they didn't fully understand their own car in extreme conditions. And this is the point of no return in history. Because from here we are no longer talking about a complicated weekend. We are talking about a structural vulnerability that can be repeated on any other circuit if it is not corrected. Miami was not an isolated case, it was a warning. The problem is no longer what happened, but what can happen again. Andrea Stella's discovery does not remain a simple technical explanation. It completely changes the panorama within McLaren. Because when they understand that what happened with Oscar Piastri was not an isolated case, but the direct consequence of a structural weakness, the problem is no longer a one-time problem and becomes a real threat for the entire season. This is where the impact becomes much deeper. Miami not only took away a possible pole position or a better result, it took away certainties from them. And in Formula One, losing certainties is losing control. Because now the team knows that every qualifying session can become a trap if they fail to fully master the interaction between their aerodynamic package and the power system. The immediate consequence is clear: internal distrust in the car's own performance. It is no longer enough to have pace in long runs or show speed in the sprint. The real problem appears when everything is decided in a single round, where the margin for error is non-existent. And the most critical thing is that this type of failure does not always manifest itself in the same way, which makes it even more dangerous. It is a silent enemy. For Piastri, the blow is also significant. Because although externally it may seem like a bad performance, internally it is clear that he was a victim of a system that left him exposed at the worst possible moment. This changes the narrative completely. It's not a driver who failed under pressure, it's a driver who didn't have the tools necessary to execute. And that, within a team, has huge implications in terms of trust and development. But the real critical point is what comes next. Because this type of problem forces McLaren to rethink its approach. It is no longer just about continuing to develop the car to make it faster, but about making it more predictable. And that is an important change in philosophy. Instead of constantly pushing the limit, they must now understand where that limit is, and how to avoid crossing it at the wrong time. Furthermore, this episode leaves a clear signal to the rest of the grid. McLaren has potential, yes, but it also has vulnerabilities. And in such a competitive championship, that's valuable information for their rivals. They know that if they take the team to extreme situations, especially in qualifying, they can force errors or expose weaknesses that have not yet been completely resolved. And this is how the circle of the scandal closes. What started as an inexplicable classification ends up revealing a much bigger problem. A car that is extremely fast but not yet fully understood. A powerful weapon, but unstable. Miami 2026 wasn't just a bad result. It was the moment McLaren realized they had crossed a dangerous line. That of developing faster than they could understand. What happened at Miami 2026 was not simply a bad classification, nor a specific error, nor a failed execution by Oscar Piastri. It was the direct exposure of a much more uncomfortable truth within McLaren. The team has built a car with enormous potential, but that it has not yet fully mastered its most critical limits. Because when you look at everything together, the story changes completely. A competitive driver, a solid weekend, a fast car, and yet a result that doesn't fit. And the only real explanation is this: there are factors within the car that still escape the team's total control, especially in conditions where everything is decided in thousands. Andrea Stella's discovery not only explains what happened, but also leaves a clear warning for the future. McLaren has pushed development so aggressively that it has reached a point where raw performance is no longer the problem. The problem is understanding. And in Formula One, understanding your car is as important as making it fast. Miami marks a before and after. Because from now on, each classification will be a test not only of speed but of control. Each lap launched will be a calculated risk, where the slightest failure in energy management can once again destroy a result. And that completely changes the way the team must face the rest of the season. This is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of constant tension within the team. The fight is no longer just against rivals, but against their own technical limitations. And the big question that remains in the air is inevitable. Can McLaren master this invisible detail before it costs them something even bigger again? Or was Miami just the first warning of a problem that could define their entire season? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.